Okay, we're being recorded. Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar organized by the Agricultural Working Group of the Scaling Community of Practice. My name is Leonard Woltering and I chair this working group, although I'd rather speak of a bench because this is really a joint effort by my colleague Maria Boa, also at CIMIT in Mexico, and Julia Howard at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Frank Place of IFPRI and the Policies, Institutions and Markets Program, and Mark Huizinga of USAID. For those of you who are not yet familiar with the community of practice, it started 7 years ago to address a simple question. How can the development community design and deliver sustainable solutions that match the scale of the need? By now, we have 800 more members passionate about this question, divided over 9 working groups. We have a newsletter and an annual event around October every year. And we just, I think, Maria, if you can post a website in the chat, that's all the information that you need there. We're all volunteers and membership is free. That's the good news. After our annual meeting of last year, Richard Cole, who you see also here today, was commissioned to filter out a number of hot scaling issues that cut across all these 9 different working groups. The first one that really popped up very strongly was the issue of scaling and systems change. We had a great session last May, and I encourage you to check this out on the website. You can see the recording and some info notes and also the kind of like the brief about that meeting, where we really explored, I think, the interface and the tensions that come along with scaling and systems work. Today, we continue with an example of how this plays out in agriculture. We have 3 great speakers, a panel discussion, and then space for Q&A. So please put your questions in the chat, and depending on the sound quality, the video quality, we can also have some people come in and ask some short questions. This program takes about 1 hour. We reserved another 30 minutes for informal networking in a virtual setting. This was designed by Maria, and we encourage you to join. We will explain in the end how that works. It is a pilot, I must say, but if you like it, we can scale it, right? Okay, enough jokes. Now I hand over to today's moderator, Maria, scaling coordinator and natural born systems thinker. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Leonard. So I am very happy to moderate today's webinar, especially because seeds play a crucial role in food systems, and particularly during this current UN Decade of Action, so which calls for accelerating unsustainable solutions to all the world's biggest challenges. In this context, as Leonard was saying, the purpose of this webinar is to exchange information and experiences on how strengthening seed systems facilitated the scaling of improved seed varieties, the relations, key challenges, and unintended consequences. So for the opening remarks, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Richard Cole, a strategic planner and scaling guru with more than 20 years of experience in scaling innovations, with foundations, NGOs, international donors, and social enterprises. And of course, he's a dear member of the community of practice. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. I'll try to make this quick as we have 2 really great speakers on this. As Leonard mentioned, several months ago, I was commissioned by the Scaling Community of Practice to write a short paper on the issue of what is the relationship between scaling up and systems or systems change. And that was a input into a webinar that Leonard mentioned. And I want to just share briefly some of the findings of that paper and more of the framing, I guess, of how we think about these things and how we might apply them as we listen to the presentations by our 2 speakers today. One of the issues that comes up in systems change, I think and scaling, is that there's a generally understood that you really need to take into account systems in scaling. And then the question is, well, how much? And we thought about this in 3 dimensions, but particularly breadth and depth, which is how much or how many of the parts of the system need to be changed, and how deep or how large are the changes made. And there have been many critics of scaling up that have argued that scaling largely takes existing systems as given and simply tries to create enough space or align itself with these systems. So you can think, for example, if we're scaling up through the public sector, is there enough? We don't, when people work to scale innovations that the public sector might deliver, for example, maybe improved extension services, certainly relevant to scaling up new seed innovations. We try to make sure there's government funding for those innovations, but we don't really necessarily work to change the extent of funding or how much funding there might be, or other issues like that. So this issue of how much of the system needs to be changed and how much of a change needs to be made, I'd like us to think about today is particularly relevant to seeds and seed systems, because seed systems are really a distributed model. And if I can, what happened here? This is a model that was recently proposed about how we think about seed systems. And it starts in the upper right-hand corner of this discovery, development, and small-scale testing of new seed varieties. The selection of those varieties, characteristics, and costs, large-scale testing and registration, seed production generation, commercial seed sales, and then somewhere between the farmer purchases is the important missing link, which is variety design, market research, and product profile. Does that go into the discovery phase? Does that come from the farmers? Or does that only influence commercial seed production? So you can imagine that if we think about this little circle of 7 steps, and I've kind of compressed the model a little bit, there are a variety of institutions or systems that need to be in place for this system to work effectively. What does it require, for example, for the yellow registration in terms of national registration systems? What does it require in terms of, is there adequate production of breeder and foundation seed for early generation seed production? What types of institutions need to be placed or for commercial seed production to be successful in translating the various new seed breeds and genomics into actually commercial varieties that farmers can purchase? So the one thing I'd like you to take away from this particular diagram is 2 things. One is, when we think about systems, what are the systems that need to be put in place for each one of these to function correctly? And if in a particular country or global context, that system doesn't exist or is weak, how it needs to be strengthened. And we're going to hear about some efforts to do that today. And the other thing, which I think is equally important, is the linkages between these different activities as in the overall seed system, which is, as I alluded to in the previous slide, by and large, in most places, seed breeding and seed production and seed distribution are a distributed model. They're different actors. Seed breeding often starts with CG centers, such as CIMMYT that Maria and Leonard are with. It then proceeds to transfer or work with local partners like National Agricultural Research Systems in the large-scale testing, et cetera, and registration. And then the early generation seed production can be a different actor and commercial seed actors. So how do we pass the baton? How are the linkages made in the system? The other issues that have come up in our study of systems were a few other questions, which is this issue of participation and equity. Who in that circle that I just showed decides which seed product types are assessed, what farmers' needs are considered important, and how that translates into breeding decisions, registration decisions, et cetera, et cetera. Who participates, who decides, and what are the implications, secondly, for equity? We know that the farmers who use seeds are not a uniform group. There's small farmers, big farmers, rich farmers, poor farmers, farmers that have access to rain-fed agriculture versus irrigation, farmers that have, for whatever their reasons, decided to use hybrid seeds versus traditional seeds, et cetera, et cetera. And how do the decisions that are made in systems, or the way the systems work and how they connect to each other, excuse me, address or affect these issues of what type of seeds are produced for whom and with what benefits? I've mentioned here, and you can see on the slide, this question of this distributed system about the links between CGIRs, seed breeders, NARs, seed companies, distributors, farmers. And one of the questions I would add with that is, this is a system which by and large doesn't have any central coordination mechanism. And one of the things that often comes up in systems is who does that coordination? How does it function? How does it happen? And is it adequate? And we often speak about the need for coordination, but we often do so in a way that's aspirational, like we should coordinate, but we really often don't talk about what are the incentives or motivations for individual actors in the system to coordinate with each other, or the linkages that would facilitate that. So I'll leave you with those questions. How much systems change is needed in the seed systems category in terms of which parts of the system and what linkages? How does that work, particularly in a distributed system where there are multiple different actors who often pass the baton from each other? What are the implications for equity and participation? And how do we get coordination in this type of distributed system? So I hope that's helpful for you all in framing what's going to be, I think, a very exciting presentation by our two speakers about seed systems and how this relates to scaling up. How do these questions of linkages, distribution, weaknesses in the system, are we doing enough systems change in terms of breadth or depth and what are the impact of all of those questions on the potential for scaling seeds? So thank you very much.
Great, Richard. Thank you so much. Great points for the plenary discussion that we will have after the presentations. So now our first guest speaker is Mulemia Maina. She is the Managing Director of AgriXperience. She's a leader in the African seed sector and has lots of experiences with organizations like Rockefeller Foundation, Red Cross, and with the USAID funded Scaling Seeds and Technologies partnerships at AGRA. Thanks for joining us today, Mulemia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thanks for having me. As Maria has introduced me, I have worked in seed systems over the last 20 years in about 20 countries of sub-Saharan Africa, through the entire value chain, from supporting projects in breeding with the NARs, training, and seed production and distribution, across the, private sector companies and agro dealers. And more interestingly is that I have actually worked shortly with the Seed Trade Association of Kenya, which is a different dimension, because in that position as the head of that association for a short time, I did see the questions private sector sometimes ask of the public sector, and vice versa, and some of the thinking that would help go into scaling. So with that said, I want to just share my screen, my presentation. Moment. Hi, Maria, maybe you could help me share, because for some reason my presentation, which was on screen, is not there anymore.
Don't worry, just give me 1 second. I will have it right here.
Okay.
Technical issues are always always there. So can you see my screen now?
No.
Not yet.
Yes. No.
Oh,
Yes.
there we are.
Perfect.
Thank you. So next. So what I'm going to actually present is examples we have learned from Zambia. We have worked with several government and private sector participants in the seed value chain. And one of the kindest, I think, gestures has been from the Zambian seed community, both the Seed Control and Certification Institute and the Zambian private sector, who have opened their doors to show what they do so that they actually have a lot of seed production and exports in the region. And through 2 learning trips that we took the Kenyan and Tanzanian delegations in 2016 and 2019, I have derived some lessons that I'm going to present. So also I would like to extend thanks to Dr. Nathan Piri, who's the Chief Seeds Officer of the Seed Systems and the Inspectorate section of SCCI, who has given input into my presentation today. Next. And so a bit about our experience. We are actually private sector that was incorporated in 2012 based in Nairobi. And we really do look for sustainability as we try to improve the smallholder and seed producer productivity. And we focus on developing strong seed systems in sub-Saharan Africa. We have worked in several countries and continue to work with several countries and development partners. And I invite you to look at our website just to see, get more information about the work we do. Next. So about Zambia, we all know, most of us, that Zambia is a landlocked country, which is surrounded by 8 neighboring countries. And that gives it a huge opportunity for seed export. And they have 42 million hectares of arable land across 3 agrological regions, which is based on rainfall patterns. And the seed industry is governed by the seed law, which is Cap 236 of the Plant and Variety Seed Acts, and another law, which is number 18 of 207 Plant Breeders' Rights Act. So both of these laws are enforced by the government regulator, who is the Seed Control and Certification Institute, SCCI. Now, SCCI is also a department within the Ministry of Agriculture and is a designated seed certification authority in Zambia, and they are responsible for regulating the seed industry. Next slide, please. Now the genesis of this whole development was before 1991, there was heavy government involvement in variety development, seed production, distribution, and marketing. The breeding was done by the Zambia Agricultural Research Institute, almost wholesomely. Seed production was by the parastatal ZAMSeed, and seed marketing was by a government board, the National Agricultural Marketing Board. So it was all government-led. You can guess that the volumes are not that much of seed produced. Now, the basis for change was reforms after the 1991 revision of the law. So there was a revision to the Plant Variety and Seed Act, which liberalized the seed sector and allowed for private sector entrance. There was decentralization of the whole certification steps by SCCI giving authority to private sector to do some part of that quality control and certification. And then there was licensing following that, actually to allow the private sector to carry on these activities under, of course, close collaboration and supervision of SCCI. And then there was also an enactment of the Plant Variety Protection Law, which allowed for more varieties to be introduced by the private sector. Next slide, please. And so the result of that, which I think is really key, is that it did open up, starting from the broad overall picture, it did actually open up the seed sector for investors. We saw, you see more investors started moving in. There was increased private research by seed companies. And actually in our visits, we noticed that the investment by private sector just in the whole research and the production chain is very, very advanced. Then there was also diverse players that came in, including multinationals. I have to say, I think in Zambia, you see quite a number of a mixture of seed producing companies, including the multinationals and African regional companies, and also national and local companies. There's also some NGO seed production, farm associations, cooperatives, and seed projects. So this enables to some extent, some specialization where you see like hybrid maize would be maybe, produced a lot by the multinationals and the regional companies, and some of the other grain crops, you find like maybe the local companies, especially the women-led would be producing seed of crops like legumes, like cowpea and pigeon pea and, so on, groundnut and so on. And next slide, please. So what was the result of those, reforms in law? This increased actually seed certification capacity overall for the country through establishing satellite labs. At the beginning, I think Zambia just had like one main lab. It's a big country, and all the seed had to be brought to this lab, with delays for testing. Now there are satellite labs and stations, some of them private sector owned. So that's my next point. Private seed testing labs were opened by the private sector, and then those licensing of personnel from the private sector, both as seed inspectors and samplers. And Zambia has a policy of maintaining at least an average of 60 active inspectors every year and 30 active samplers. And so this requires that they continuously train and license private sector inspectors while maintaining very low numbers of government inspectors, because most of that work now is done by the private sector, and only 14 government inspectors are maintained. But this does not negatively affect the seed volumes. On the other hand, we've actually seen quite a huge number of volumes certified every year, as you see in my next slide. Yes, so over 90,000 metric tons of maize seed volumes are produced annually. When we compare these with like production in other countries, just the volumes of maize, for example, if I take like Kenya, which produces, I think the last into 2019 volumes would be something like 47,000 metric tons. You can see that's almost a doubling and much more than others, other countries. And they also do produce other crops such as soybean, crop seeds such as soybean, wheat, groundnut, cotton, and potato. Out of these 90,000 metric tons, about 30,000 metric tons of maize seed is exported annually. So Zambia actually does serve as a big source of seed to neighboring countries in the region. And about 3,000 hectares of seed crops are produced by local female-led seed companies. And then there's a lot of investment in seed production, marketing, distribution by different types of seed producers. Next slide, please. Now, how does this work? So SCCI has the mandate to oversee the production and kind of quality oversight on seed. But what they do, because they train the private sector inspectors and samplers, they set minimum academic qualifications, but they also develop the appropriate curriculum for training. And each year they run a 2-week intensive course, which includes exams, because the authorized inspectors and samplers must pass the exam for them to qualify to be inspectors. Then there's a conditional licensing given for 1 year to check the competence, which then follows full granting a full license. And these licenses are renewed annually based on the performance and compliance to the licensing conditions, which means that for those who perform well, then there's more, they're given more autonomy. Those who don't perform, then some of that is revoked. So it kind of keeps a good check and balance on that. And just note that SCCI inspects all higher level seed, such as pre-basic and basic. That's not done through authorization. And then they monitor certified seed production, and then they sample and test all seed meant for export. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I just want to point out something that has happened, because like I mentioned earlier, there should be a critical number of inspectors and samplers maintained every year of 60 and 30. Now, we had the COVID pandemic last year that did have some challenges in the typical training that SCCI would conduct. So as a result, SCCI shifted that to an online training because they still had to certify, and examine those inspectors and samplers. Now, in doing so, it required purchasing specialized equipment, video cameras and so on, training the trainers and inspectors to be able not to present not physically, but virtually, modifying the presentations, recording videos, to kind of take people through how that would have been if it was a physical training, and production of relevant training manuals. The result that was very interesting is that normally they would have a class of 30 to 40 maximum because of the physical space. This more than doubled. There were about maybe 79 in the first training, including those who took the actual exam. And companies were, taking more than, you'd see a company with 5 to 8 participants rather than the 2 or 3 that normally would be sent for the training. And SCCI also conducted this training in Mozambique and Malawi for the seed inspectors in those countries virtually, because again, they couldn't travel and also needed that. So it allowed for other countries to crowd in without having to physically travel. And this was also done this year in 2021, and the training attracted even more participants, 102 participants, out of them 37 being female. So out of these, SCCI is working through support from a USAID Feed the Future funded activity called Supporting Seed Systems for Development. They're developing a virtual platform that will put all this material virtually to enable seed inspectors and samplers to be trained almost at their own time and take tests to advance the next level, which will actually allow for cost-effective all-round training. Next slide, please. So I'm just kind of looking back at all this and what has gotten Zambia to where they are, being a leader in seed production and export in the region. So there's been a lot of flexibility in developing the seed system that started with the changing of the laws, but also how SCCI worked with the private sector to support seed production. So policy should be developed in line with stakeholders' needs in mind. So the whole point here is to get seed to farmers, and it doesn't matter who does really what, there's no conflict over that. That was very clear to both SCCI and the private sector. It is important also for the government as regulators to play an enabling role and not be a deterrent or in competition with private sector. And I'm saying this because you see a lot of, some governments that still have these laws in place that can enable private sector, at least authorization to inspection, that they tend to also want to have maybe some seed production, in competition with that, and that just doesn't really work right. It's very important to have clear roles and responsibilities both for government and private sector, and have constant dialogue for problem solving and fostering trust. Now that's important because also private sector, on the other hand, needs to really strengthen its internal control so that they can gain the trust of the regulator. When we talk to the companies in Zambia, they say whenever they had a benchmark like 90% germination, they would make sure that they were at 98, so that at no point did they fail. So in effect, it's actually made the quality even better because private sector always wanted to be higher than what was the standard set by the government. And then the other thing I think, because looking at us in development practice, we have projects that are time-bound, 3-year projects, 5-year projects that you want to report results. But this system changes and the scaling happens over time. I'm talking of, laws that were changed in 1991, and over time we are seeing that result. So you can't really report these changes in these short time frames. You kind of need a longer time lens to look at how that change is happening. So these are just a few thoughts that can help us maybe start the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mulemia. I think this gives us a very nice overview of what's happening in Zambia. I saw already that you wrote already some questions in the chat. Please, if you have questions for her, Richard or Gloria, write them with their name. And we will have, after Gloria's presentation, a space for plenary discussion and then an open Q&A. Thank you, Mulemia. So now our second guest speaker is Gloria Otieno. Is a CGR colleague from the Alliance of Biodiversity International and CIAT. She's a genetic resources and food security policy specialist with over 9 years working on resilient seed systems and related policies. And Gloria, we know that you are in the field, so we're happy that you can join us today. The floor is yours. So if you can share your screen or let me know if I can help you with something.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to be part of this meeting. I'm also learning a lot from previous presenters on issues to do with scaling. So I'm going to share with you experiences mainly with the smallholder systems. So the experiences are drawn from Nepal and Uganda, where we've been working with the smallholders and where we have been trying not only to help smallholders access seeds with the desired traits, but also to ensure that the institutions which relate with smallholder seed systems take cognizance of the smallholders' needs, and such that scaling is also embedding issues of equity and sustainability of smallholders' seed systems. So the outline of my presentation is mainly going to look at what is scaling, conceptualization of scaling, scaling in seed systems. I won't dwell much on that part because it has already been presented by the two previous presenters. Then I will look at mainly experiences from Uganda and Nepal, and then draw some conclusions. So in a broader sense, scaling is just expanding or replicating successful policies or programs to reach a greater number of people. And it is a broader process of innovation and learning. So from a research perspective, researchers create innovations, both technological, methodological, innovations in programs, in policies, and these innovations are then scaled up or scaled out. And that brings us to two concepts of scaling, which is either geographical, horizontal, or upscaling, which is mainly institutional. And of course, scaling also involves multiple stakeholders. When we look at seed systems, we should ideally try and look at the key features of seed systems in most developing countries. And the reality is that we have a seed system that is both formal and informal, where we involve breeding, and breeding involves national agricultural research institutions that are then allowed to produce basic seed, foundation seed, and then involve private sector. And then of course, scaling out to smallholders. But we also have an informal seed system that also involves farmers who seek seed from markets, who exchange seeds with each other, and who are also engaged in seed production. And of late, in the past maybe 5 to 10 years, we are seeing an emergence of a very important aspect of this seed system, which is intermediary. So intermediary tries to link both the formal and the informal seed system. Yeah. So how about scaling in seed systems? Mainly based on research, and many of the research on seed system tries to address two main issues. One is access to new or more resilient varieties, or more high yielding varieties with the specific traits that farmers want. And the other one is working on access to quality seed and therefore looking at the markets. How do the markets work to ensure that farmers have access to seed? And access to seed here not only looks at the availability, but also the issues of price, the issues of proximity. In the context of smallholder farmers, proximity is a very key aspect of access to seed for smallholder farmers. And then we look at it in terms of bottom-up innovations being scaled through bottom-up approaches, which involve farmers' innovations, for example, through participatory breeding, or top-down scaling, which involves breeders' innovations, mainly outscaling or upscaling new varieties. And then, of course, we see also that there is a deep involvement of both public and private sector institutions, including research, in seed systems to basically facilitate scaling. So we see the importance of partnerships in scaling in seed systems. And then another important aspect is an enabling environment. And that has already been talked about by Mulemia in the previous presentation. An enabling environment in terms of policy, regulatory frameworks is key to enable scaling in seed systems. So my first example is from Nepal. And this is mainly scaling of farmers' varieties. And giving a background of Nepal, Nepal's seed system is 80% informal, and only 15% of the seed demand is from the formal sector. Most of the varieties are from breeding programs which use foreign germplasm, and only 25% of varieties in the formal sector are from originating from Nepal. However, Nepal has a high genetic diversity with over 6,000 species related to agriculture. And the main challenges in the Nepalese seed system is access to diverse seeds for resilient. And then the other challenge is that some crops are not adequately covered by the formal sector. For example, vegetables, some legumes like beans, finger millet, proso millet. The millets are not adequately covered by the formal sector because private companies maybe don't see them as very profitable. And this is not only a problem in the Nepalese seed system, but in most of the developing countries. Then, of course, we have the issue of access to quality seed, quality in terms of high germination rates, and so on and so forth. And then we also have the challenge of markets in terms of commercialization and the capacity of various seed companies or local seed businesses or seed cooperatives to be able to commercialize and market local varieties or even improved varieties and to reach to a wider range of farmers. And we must also appreciate that the farmers are heterogeneous. There are some large-scale farmers that grow mainly for the market and therefore prefer to source their seed from the formal sector. They are purely for-profit farmers. Then we have subsistence farmers who mix. They grow some for sale to the market, therefore they will source both from the formal and for the informal sector because they also have special needs in terms of vegetables, legumes, millets, that they cannot get those seeds from the formal sector, but they have their own exchange mechanisms within their seed systems and through their social seed networks. So the main approach in our research is using farmers' participation to improve the adoption rates through, of course, participatory plant breeding, which also encompasses the use of local varieties. And this actually improves the adoption rates. And then these varieties developed through PPB are then released, registered and released. And once they're registered and released, they can then be commercialized through many small institutions that have outreach in the local communities and in the rural areas, such as farmers seed cooperatives, community seed banks, and also local breeding institutions, as well as local seed businesses. And of course, in this model of commercialization, we mainly look at alternative quality assurance mechanisms to enable farmers also to participate in the seed value chain. So in Nepal, these results are based on a seed systems project where we were trying to reduce the vulnerability of smallholder farmers so that they can be able to access diverse seeds in terms of varieties and also in terms of crops. So the yellow is mainly the outreach districts where we scaled out, and the green are the intervention districts. So the first outcome was mainly to improve the capacity and diversity of seed suppliers and institutions. So the very local seed cooperatives, the community seed banks, working together to improve the both quality and quantities of seed, and also to ensure that that seed is sufficiently diverse in terms of both intra and interspecific diversity. And then, of course, we also looked at institutions and policies as a very key outcome for this project. And so in Nepal, we did some participatory plant breeding where farmers evaluated germplasm. This germplasm was evaluated through PVS with the breeding program, so Nepal Agricultural Research Council. And then these were used as breeding lines, and then this also could be introduced back as heterogeneous populations, which breeders can also make use of. So as a result of this, we were able to have some, this year in 2021, let me talk of 2021. In the past, we've also registered some varieties, but in 2021, together with farmers, 6 new varieties have been registered. And this is one variety of proso millet, foxtail millet, one variety of finger millet, one variety of amaranth, and 2 common bean varieties. So we are also able to work with community seed banks. We are also able to work with community seed banks in 6 sites who maintain source seed in collaboration with the agricultural knowledge centers who provide extension services. So you see that there's a partnership there between seed banks and extension services, as well as the breeding programs. So it is this same model that we use to scale out from the sites which you saw in green to the sites which you saw in yellow. And so we also have key aspects such as variety registration and also alternative quality assurance mechanisms. And this is the process of variety registration for seed, for local varieties. And this is mainly done for community-based organizations or farmers groups or community seed banks. So for those varieties that farmers don't wish to be improved, or they don't need to go through the formal breeding process, they have an alternative mechanism of having them registered and released so that they can be able to be commercialized. And of course, a key aspect of this process is capacity building of these community organizations to be able to submit their proposals. But there is also collaboration with the National Gene Bank, which keeps these collections in duplicates, and also the local agricultural offices, the agricultural knowledge centers, who are also the extension services, to assess the capacity of these community-based organizations and also to train these community-based organizations on source seed maintenance and quality seed production. And so, as I've already mentioned, we have traveling seminars of the Variety Release Committee that travels to various sites to sensitize farmers on the guidelines for local crop registration and how to maintain the seeds once these have been registered, and also generally on the current seed laws, on what they're allowed to do, on what they are not allowed to do, on how they can do truthful labeling for their products, or such kind of things.
Lori, you have 1 minute to finish, please, for questions.
So
thank you.
See that Nepal really has an enabling environment which includes critical elements like registration and listing of farmers' varieties, truthful labeling, soil alternative quality assurance, and of course, they work in partnerships with the local communities and also with the research. And then, of course, the achievements, you can see what we have in terms of increased seed production and outreach, mainly in terms of how we have managed to upscale. And so in Uganda, also the same. Most of the Ugandan seed sector is informal. And of course, some crops are not well covered by the informal sector, such as bananas, beans. And so the seed market in Uganda is also very fragmented with low private sector participation. So in Uganda, we also had the same process of selecting varieties with farmers, and these varieties were upscaled through mainly, this was just mainly the selection of the methods of selection. And we ranked and selected 7 millet and 7 finger millet and 7 bean varieties. And let me just talk about what we have achieved. Mainly quality declared seed production using guidelines, where we work with farmer groups to produce quality declared seed. But we have also seen linkages with private sector for both seed and products. And this is mainly for the business model. And then we have also worked with the local seed businesses. And may I say there are about 200 local seed businesses in Uganda who produce seed using QDS. And also we have decentralized seed certification with 65 seed inspectors that work with farmers. So we've seen, let me just quickly talk about some of the challenges. So some of the farmers' varieties in Uganda, because of the different policies, they cannot be registered, so they cannot be produced. So the alternative way is through the breeding. So where we engage with the breeding programs to release some of these varieties. And then we have also seen some challenges regarding the legal space, for example, in Uganda, with respect to the registration of farmers' varieties. And I'm happy to inform the audience that this key issue is being considered the policy is under review to include the registration of farmers' varieties, but also building capacity for alternative quality assurance. So may I just conclude by saying what are the key considerations while scaling in seed systems? One of them is the heterogeneity of seed systems, looking at both formal, informal, and influenced by the political environment and cultural factors. Institutionalization of innovations, and this is where capacity development and partnerships come in as a very key issues. And of course, innovation platforms or learning platforms where key learnings can be disseminated. And then of course, the last one is an enabling policy environment. Thank you so much. That is the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Super interesting and very delightful to see what Lemia was talking about the formal sector and how you shared your experiences with the informal sector of seed systems. We are a bit tight of time, so for the panel, I will ask you to Mulemia and Gloria one main question, and then we will go directly to the questions on the chat, so we can have time to answer a couple of them. I would like to ask you to try to keep your answers between 1 or 2 minutes, considering the time. So the question is for Mulemia and Gloria, and then if Richard wants to contribute with some insights. Most of the participants to this webinar are members of the COP and the CGR. And for the COP, scaling is more than just more, right? It is about sustainability, responsibility, it's about equity, it's about who is benefiting with the seeds, who is taking decisions. So how do you see this being addressed in the seed systems in your cases? Who wants to start, Mulemia?
Yes, thank you, Maria. So I think the important thing for me, looking at the Zambia case, has been how, you know, the whole interaction between the players, both public and private, who are in the market to stay. So really bringing sustainability. So I think, as you say, it's really just more than just scaling. It's Zambia taking opportunity of, you know, its, you know, resources to be able to grow seed for export, taking advantage of, you know, maybe the kind of not very successful system that came out of Zimbabwe. So when people wanted to relocate, that was definitely the next, you know, place that, you know, investors looked at. Just kind of being in the right place, in the right time, at the right time, in terms of, you know, the policy environment, how public and private sector work together, you know, basically to improve the system. So I think it's all who takes responsibility, good coordination by the government sector, responsibility, as I said, by the private sector, in making sure that quality is, you know, up to standard. They can be trusted to actually undertake private inspections, and then also the sustainability, because you have players who are in the market long term that can enable the system to function. So just kind of briefly, that's how I see that having worked out.
And then if you go through the comments, Mulemia, you will see that Richard and Julie and also Kate are agreeing with you too. Gloria, would you like to add something about this responsible scaling and equity on your cases in 1 minute?
Yes, thank you very much, Maria and Mulemia. I think my case highlights the issue of equity more because the cases involve farmers directly. They involve farmers participating in selection of varieties, but they also involve farmers in participating in the seed value chains, so that upscaling is kind of bottom up and not top down per se. But one key thing I think that is really, really important is also the capacity development that is needed to ensure that you know, scaling takes place in a way that is taking cognizance of equity and sustainability. So capacity development of farmers, institutions at the local level, and also of key institutions like NAS or local NGOs that can then be able to work with the other partners on scaling out innovations in different platforms. And then finally, of course, it's the enabling environment. As you have seen in both cases, the enabling environment is key to ensuring that scaling is done equitably and sustainably.
Thank you, Mulemia. Richard, would you like to say something about this question? Add something?
The particular question, or you mean the equity question, or in general?
The equity question.
No, actually, I was looking at the question from Arwen Bailey that I thought was quite good and was hoping that Molemia would answer it. So I'll hold my question
Let's go for
to
it.
the relate.
So-
Well, Arwen raises the question of the seed subsystem is one of many subsystems in Zambia. What are the, if I, the relationship between seed certification and other potential blockages or bottlenecks or lack of linkages in the system? One might argue that the reason this happened, Julie and myself and others argued, was because it was driven by exporters' need for certification to allow for that. But that doesn't necessarily, well, coming back to the equity question, had a side benefit, I think, of increased production of seed in for domestic use as well. But changes to the whole seed system, of which certification is only one, other issues that might have been of more need to local farmers or small farmers might not be getting addressed because there isn't the big push or demand from exporters. So I'd love to hear what Melania has to say about Arwen's question about what are the other subsystems in Zambia that need for success, not just in certification, but in other things.
Okay, so thank you for that question. I will attempt to kind of, answer from maybe the point of view that there are actually still issues. I did see a question about that. Again, certification is very focused towards hybrid crops, hybrid maize, and maybe not the other, crops that are important as well for nutrition and food security. And that's true. I mean, there's definitely other, sectors or subsystems that do need attention. And one of the things that I was part of, in a dialogue was the companies that actually focusing on these non-maize crops in terms of certification. They actually do admit that there's a weakness there and they need to strengthen that. And how do they do that? So just before they changed the training to virtual training, they had decided to do specialized modules for the legumes crops and, kind of just put out what can be, focused for that. But again, this, like I say, was kind of overtaken by events. But I think with their focus on virtual training, now they can actually have material that focuses on these crops and maybe have more producers that can, pay attention to the other crops rather than just the hybrid crops. That said, I really wouldn't speak about other systems that much because I my kind of knowledge is limited to the whole certification and interaction, with the regulator and the private sector companies that invest in that. But I just want to make a comment about, what drives investment. So investment here, I think in Zambia, because there was, the climate that is ripe for big companies, multinationals and local companies to actually up their quality control, they crowded in and invested. There are kind of similar countries that would have these, but because the environment doesn't allow for good quality control, and some companies really shy away from actually kind of like lowering that quality control so that they don't take seed out there that's not up to their internal standards. I think that's a very important factor to consider, that having that mechanism that allows for private sector to really have as much, the optimum quality control really does actually, attract that investment, from the multinationals and other big companies.
Thank you so much, Molemia. So we are ahead of time. I think we're having such a rich discussion and examples. We will end this part of the program in 5 more minutes. So I will suggest that I will give one more question to Gloria, and then we keep the discussion on the informal meeting gathering, and we can have this exchange in more informal and face-to-face form, if you agree. So my question for Molemia, that is, I think, from Connie, for Gloria, how can work of those seed banks and farmers connect with the large formal breeding program for mutual strengthening? If you can answer in 1 minute, Gloria, that will be great.
So we actually do work with the breeding programs to upscale some of those varieties that farmers have selected. But as you may know, some of those community seed banks maintain in situ diversity, and diversity maintained in situ is critical for breeding because it is undergoing the evolutionary process, and therefore it really contains the traits that they have accumulated over the years. So these seed banks are linked to various breeding programs in the regions where we work. For example, the seed bank in Hoima works closely with the National Agricultural Research Station in Hoima, which has a breeder there, a finger millet breeder. And so some of this work on PVS is actually done in collaboration with the breeder. So some of that material, actually breeders have shown interest in them to use them as either parent material or whatever for their breeding work. So that is one way that we are really trying to upscale some of these farmers' varieties.
Thank you, Gloria. Just for the time being, and we have so many questions, and we think that we can keep the discussion alive during the informal meeting. I think I will give the floor to Leonard to close this formal part of the session, and we can keep the questions for the informal one. Leonard?
Yeah, thanks. So I think most of us are involved in scaling something into an existing system, right? And others may work from the other way around. They start from the system going backwards. And I think we meet each other somewhere in the middle. And I think in that middle, we need to talk about equity. We need to talk about sustainability. We need to talk about responsibility. I think that came out of today's session. I think I would like to thank the speakers, Richard, Gloria, Mulemia, for sharing their experiences on this very important topic, the interface between scaling and systems change. Big thanks for Maria for the excellent moderation. And to all the participants, I would say, if you're not a member yet, register via the website. The topic of scaling and systems change is going to be on the agenda for a while. The official part of the webinar is now over, but we do really encourage you to join us on Topia. It's really fun, and it's a bit experimental, but it's really fun. You can ask your questions that you wrote in the chat. You can ask them directly to Gloria. You can talk to other people who are here. It's a very fun way to interact, and Maria will show you how it works. So thank you so much, and see you in the virtual world as my avatar. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Leonard. So for the ones who want to keep the discussion, stay in the discussion. Can you see my screen, by the way? Someone can confirm for tonight?
Yes.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
So you will, if you click in the chat to the link, we will have the options there. You will see this screen. You have to click next, 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 click above, and then you will just have to type your name. In my case, it's Maria, of course, and enter. And you will say allow to use your microphone or your camera, and you just close the preferences, and then you will appear in this world. So Mulemia, Leonard, and others are gonna, and the other speakers are gonna be present. And you can walk around and have a more face-to-face interaction. So for the ones who are staying, this is gonna be the world. You can walk through around the fireplace, the fire camp, the table, and also the dance floor. And it's a very intuitive platform. So please log out from Zoom and log in into the Topia. And it's going to be experimental. So if you like it, for the next time, we will have enough time for this informal meeting. Nice to have you all. We will share the recording and we hope to have you in the next webinar. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Mulemia. Thank you all. See you at Topia or see you in the next webinar.